Today I'm going to be talking about glass paint and explaining to Elsie the sort of effects you can get, how we use it. Elsie's studying art and is thinking that she could maybe use some of the painted effects that we can achieve with glass paint. So I thought I would just start by talking through this piece. This is very traditional painted glass. It's done in many layers which are then fired in between. The first layer you paint is we call it the tracing, and it's all the outline and details. And then after that's fired, we do the shading. And I've also used techniques here where I have sort of randomized the way the paint adheres to the glass. And I'll talk through some of those techniques. And I've used speckling, and I do that with a toothbrush, and then it's also had other colours added, and those are enamels, because glass paints tend to come in only browns and blacks, and the enamels, you don't get strong colours, but you can see it's a pinky and a bluey colour. But this is very traditional, and I'm going to show Elsie techniques which are more free. And you get some quite nice random effects actually. So I store my palettes. I've got lots of different ones. This one is black with no gum arabic. Gum arabic is something you add to your mix just to make the paint stick to the surface of the glass a bit better. And you use that especially where you're going to overpaint your first layer without firing, because there are techniques where you can do that. So it goes dry in between, and you sort of wake it up with a bit of water. And when I said this is black, it's actually got a little bit of brown mixed in with it, because if you use only black glass paint, it can look too black. So you scrape up all the dry bits into the middle, and you rub with your palette knife. Now, when you do traditional glass painting, you have to spend a long time at this stage, because otherwise you don't get a nice blend on your paint. But because this is just to do a bit of experimenting, I'm not going to worry about that. So this bit of the paint is workable. This bit isn't. Well, it's not been woken up again, but this bit has. And then I put an area on the palette which has got water, and that way I can wet my brush and then pick up a bit of the paint. And you can see that it moves around on the glass really easily. Now there's another thing you can do which is called wet on wet painting, and you can see you get lots of different effects with that. So if you were doing a piece and you wanted a bit of something a bit more random, you can then use a hairdryer and you can use a straw. I don't think I've got a straw, but you can imagine you can blow it and you get really interesting techniques. Now the traditional way of working paint, you actually wouldn't apply it with this brush, you'd apply it with a flat brush, but I won't worry about that. Is you'd get an area like this which was wet, and then you work it with this badger brush until you get it smooth, and then you can let it dry. Because the other thing you can do with paint, I'll show you once it's dry. So now you see that I have dried this bit, and it looks a bit paler, doesn't it? So you can see it's dry, and you can see you can get this nice stipple effect.
Okay.
Or you can drag stuff through it. You know, depending on what you want to achieve. Like you could get a really nice cross-hatching effect.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of sort of ways of marking it. Actually, another thing you can do. Now I'm looking for a bit of plastic. So grab different things, and you can get all sorts of effects. And actually, you get really interesting effects sometimes when you're working wet on wet.
Right.
And you might maybe do it with there might be all sorts of different things you could try. And you could use your fingers, you know.
So when it's dried like that, it comes away quite easily.
Well, that's the thing. And in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's what makes it difficult to work with.
So there's no sort of setting process after that?
Yeah, that's fired then.
Okay.
So I wouldn't normally paint directly onto my light box. I would normally paint onto the glass, and then it's fired. But it's quite nice to work with paint that doesn't have gum arabic in, because it moves so much more easily around the place. And there's just like your imagination is the only thing that limits you when working with them. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah.
One thing maybe it's worth mentioning is that when we work with glass paint, we use these very long brushes because they carry a lot more paint, and they, as you've seen, this paint dries quite quickly, and if it dries while you're working it, it makes it quite difficult, because then when you fire it, if you've gone back over an area, you'll get bubbles. So it likes to be worked while it's wet, basically.
Yeah.
Let me just show you one of my favourite things. Toothbrush, and you get speckles, and I'll show you something else.
It rubs off really easily.
Yeah.
And cleanly, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually it's quite forgiving if you've made a mistake. So let me show you something else that can be achieved. And again, you just have to experiment. So this is window cleaner with vinegar.
Okay.
So now you've got something that's all bubbly.
Oh, would you just leave it like that?
Yeah,
then?
it depends what paint technique you're going for.
Yeah.
Like, and you want to do something a bit more expressive.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's got window cleaner in it, would it not?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't
so
matter.
when you fire it, it will stay like that.
When you fire it, what you would do is you would let it dry before you put it in the kiln, just because actually that would probably run if you tried to move it. And you would get that when you fired it. And that's just, you couldn't achieve that with a paintbrush.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of other things you could spray into it, because it all burns off in the kiln.
Right.
It burns away. That's not a problem.
So the bubbles would be gone, right? But it would
You'd
be
have
left
the holes
with the holes.
Yeah. And actually, I think I used antifreeze once, and I got some really interesting techniques with that.
So you can use anything you want, really, because once it's fired, it will remain.
Yeah. So you might want to do some line work, and you can get very
precise lines.
Very fine, precise lines.
Wow. Yeah. Let's have a steady hand.
It's a very nice medium, actually, and then if you press harder, you can make a thicker line. So, and
yeah, you're changing the angle.
Yeah. But just have a little play and see what sort of effects you enjoy. Did you do that? Or did that just happen?
No, I think that happened when you sprayed.
Oh, it's
something.
so nice, isn't it?
Yeah. Takes getting used to actually just trying to do a straight line with a paintbrush.
Yeah.
Yours are so much straighter than mine. It's been lots of experience.
I mean, yours look all right to me. There is something else which people often use.
It's just getting used to the sort of way it moves, I suppose.
Yeah. When you're painting with traditional long brushes and you're doing traditional painted work, I think I've lost some of my brushes when I took them over to the other workshop. People will often use, I'm trying to find somewhere to put it down, they'll often use a rest for their arm.
Yeah, right.
So that they don't have to.
That's a good idea.
Lean on. But if you're not doing traditional work, which is terribly precise, you maybe don't even need to worry about that. So you just have a little play and see what effects you can get.
Do you ever sort of do a circle like that, or?
I only do traditional painted work generally, and when I see this sort of thing going on the light box, I get quite jealous, and I'm like, oh, I should play around more. But the pieces I do generally call for very traditional work. Okay. This is more what you would do in sort of art glass, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Missed.
Do you have to, can you scrape it when it's, I suppose you can, I suppose you set it first and then you can scrape it like this.
Yeah.
And to set it, is it just drying it? Because
you just liquid. You just let it dry, or if you're impatient, you use a hairdryer. If you work with a tiny bit of gum arabic in it, it will just hold onto the surface a bit better. And what that will allow you to do is then a second layer where instead of using water as the carrier, you would use oil or glycol. I'll just get the glycol and I'll show it to the screen so that the folks at home know what. So it's monopropylene glycol, and this makes a great carrier for your paint, and it's water soluble, which means you don't have to separate your glycol and your water brushes, because you can work oil on top of water-based paint, and I'm saying that you can do that without firing in between, and that's the key element, not having to do an extra firing. So you can work then another layer on top without disturbing what's underneath, and that's pretty cool, because actually every time you fire your paint, it takes about, well, minimum 4 hours.
And go straight on top of it.
Yeah.
And by doing that, can you create, like, if there's a pattern underneath and you go over it and do it, layers? But
you'd have to do it with glycol. Okay. That is just lifting up the paint that's underneath.
Okay, because it's liquid and it's just mixing together.
Yeah, it's water on water. So it would have to be glycol on water.
Because you can keep adding water and making it liquid.
Yeah.
Okay.
So say you've got this area and you're really happy with it and you let it dry, you can then maybe go on top and add sort of more shading or more detail with glycol.
Okay.
So hopefully that will give you an idea of what you can achieve, and maybe if you work up some of those designs, you'll be able to use this this technique.
Yeah, more of a picture of what you can do with the paint now, and how it works.
How it works.
And that's easier to then plan for using it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
well, I hope that's been useful.
Yeah, it has. Thank you.